How many of you believe that the issue is original sin? That we're guilty for Adam's sin? How many believe that we die because of Adam's sin? I do. The Bible tells us that death passed upon all men. But then it goes on to say, in that all have sinned. You see, I mean, it's not because of original sin. Now, at the Questions on Doctrine conference, I was on a panel. I was on two panels actually, but this particular panel, and both panels I was on, I had to stand up very strongly. But I'd only noticed that I was on the Thursday one. I knew I was on the Friday one, but I only noticed I was on the Thursday one when I got there on Wednesday afternoon, because that night the whole conference was beginning. And soon after I'd noticed that I was walking along the path, one of the paths at Andrews University, and I saw this man coming that I knew with another man that I didn't know. This other man was a theologian from Loma Linda that I'd only met for the first time a few months earlier when I was doing some research out at Loma Linda White Estate when I was on the West Coast. What's his name? What?
Who was the theologian?
I'm trying to think. Larry, or starts with an S. He also is a part-time assistant pastor at the Campus Hill Church. That's the best I can do for you on it. No, Julian Nam is a theologian there too, and he was at the conference too, but he wasn't the one. And so as I greeted him, Larry, good to see you. He said, well, let me introduce to my friend, and it was Kenneth Samples. Of course, that name I knew very well, but some of you may not know who Kenneth Samples. He was the assistant to Walter Martin. He was one of the evangelicals that was going to give a paper there. And so when I spoke to them and greeted them, and I said, I noticed that we're on the same panel tomorrow. They already had realized that too. Well, I said, I've looked at the 6 of us on that panel. I'm surrounded. Yeah, they did what you did. They just kind of laughed at it. Because I knew all the rest. 2 of them were evangelicals and the other 4 may as well have been, even though they were Adventists. And I said, look, I need a bit of airtime tomorrow on this panel. There was only an hour and a quarter, which meant that each one of us, if we had a fair even amount, we'd get about 12.5 minutes to say what we wanted to say. Not all at once necessarily, but during the panel. I said, I need you men to protect me and give me a bit of time. And but what I hadn't taken into account, all the questions came from there are about 250 pastors that had come from around America to listen in. But they had the right, with the seminary students, to send up all the questions to the panel. But because I was the only one on this particular belief system, I was asked more questions than anyone else. Well, individually, I'm not saying overall, but and so it was in the middle of that I put my hand. Next to me was Dr. Knight, and I put George Knight. on his shoulder. And I said, George, do you remember when you gave the devotionals at the annual council at the General Conference in 1991? Yes. Do you remember what you spoke about? I was wondering if the compare, the MC, would stop me, because that wasn't the engagement that we were given between the panelists. But he didn't, so I kept on. Well, he said, what did I speak about? Well, you started off by saying eating cheese is not sin. There were guffaws all through the chapel there at the GC. All the staff and all the delegates for the annual council. And then you said, neither is eating rats or rattlesnake sin. And George jumped in on me then. He said, and then didn't I say adultery is not sin? I said, you certainly did. What a shocking thing to say. And I said, then you went on to say murder isn't sin. And you went on to say that stealing wasn't sin. Yes, I probably said that because I've written it up in a book. I think it probably was. I used to be perfect. I've never read the book, but I think that was probably the book it was in, but he didn't say what it was. Well, I said, George, sitting next to me, I wanted all the people to hear this in the auditorium. I said, sitting next to me was a retired South African president. He'd never been to a General Conference event ever before. Obviously, he'd never been chosen from that division to be a delegate at a General Conference event. I said, you don't know how shocked he was. I could just feel the vibe to hear you say that. But he put up on the board a great big S-I-N and a little S-I-N-S. In other words, he was saying the real issue is original sin. The sin of Adam. Not these little things like murder and rape and all those kind of things. I tell you, it's amazing what theologians come up with. And they're listened to. And their voice is accepted. Well, I said, I comforted him. I said, 1 John 3:4 doesn't say, sins are the transgression of the law. Amen. It says, sin is the transgression of the law. Amen. And I made it quite emphatically. I wanted people to know that you can't put your trust in these if it's not from the Word of God. If the issue is original sin, if that is the issue, that we're all guilty for Adam's sin and not for our own sins, there would be no word sin as a verb. It would only be a noun. It couldn't be something you do, because original sin is something you inherited. It's a noun. Now the Bible has sin as a noun and it has it as a verb. Now it's not referring to original sin when it's saying sin as a noun, but when it's dealing with your sin, our sin, and so on.